Identify yourself and a nickname if you had anything back when you first started hanging out the island, working out the island.
I was known back then as Christian Oppression when I was in the Heights. I'm married now, and I've legally changed my name to my wife's last name, so I'm Christian Kid.
Okay. So what was your first encounter with the island? What year was that?
That was in 1979, and we did a show with Legionnaire's disease. And actually, the band wasn't the Heights at the time. In '78, I had started a punk rock band called Zyklon B, and then the next thing I did was playing downtown as the Guyana Boys Choir, opening up for Clifton Chenier. And then when I got to know Jerry, he invited me to play on a show with him at the island, and the band was called Christian Oppression.
So how was that first night? That first time that you performed here at the island? What was it called? Was it the island, Rock Island?
It was Paradise Island.
Paradise Island.
And
okay.
I quickly referred to it as Parasite Island. I don't think Phil appreciated that.
Oh, okay.
But I thought that made it more punk.
Now who's Phil?
Phil Hicks was the manager of the place.
Okay.
Because I was under the impression that there was someone else who owned it. Two brothers, I think. I think the name was maybe Lonzo or something like that.
Okay.
And he had rented the place, and he worked at a supermarket, and then he decided to do this. And when I approached him about playing, he, I guess, kind of wanted to show me some of his music credentials, and he said that he had once booked a show for Jay and the Americans.
Oh, okay.
And actually, when I came into the place, he really wanted it to be a rock club. He wanted to have waitresses, and there was a prog rock band playing here. They were like Yes, and they were doing a whole week here. I think they were called Relayer. And I kind of feel like he really never really was too crazy about punk rock being here. He always kept on reverting back to trying to see if he could just have other type of music. But the place was a dive. And
now this is Phil or the owners?
This was Phil Hicks.
Phil, he wanted to have a different kind of music, but he got stuck with the punk rocker?
Yeah, and actually those two, the owners, they would actually pop in. I saw them at shows and stuff like that. So I guess they kind of were overlooking sometimes. I kind of felt like they were kind of sticking their nose in his business and trying to do things as well. One thing I felt kind of was bad was one of them was a very hot-tempered person, and he actually would, there was still leftovers of it being a tropical club before then. It had like these plastic birds hanging from the ceiling, and there was all this straw mat wrapped around the poles and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So with a punk rock concert, there'd be a kid over there with a lighter lighting the stuff up. So I think his name was George. He ran over there. He actually pulled his pistol out, and he pistol whipped this guy for destroying some of the stuff that was left there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, sounds like a typical punk rock club to me.
There you go.
God. So you played with the Heights. What year did you start playing as the Heights here?
In 1979,
Okay.
what happened was Henry Weisborn, he was a student at University of Houston, and he had this fanzine called Ultra. And I thought it was kind of humorous. I got this phone call because he had heard about, I had had these several incarnations of a punk rock band, and he said that he wanted to start a punk rock fanzine. And the first thing he wanted to do was he wanted to interview me. So he arranged for me to be interviewed at the University of Houston. And what I thought was kind of funny was I didn't expect what I saw. When I showed up there was him and two other college students, and all three of them looked like they could have been off of Duck Dynasty. They just had big long beards and flannel shirts. And I just thought it was funny because I just felt like these are probably just like any other suburban teenage kids, and their stick was now being a hippie and smoking pot and growing these long beards. And what happened for him was there was a Rock Against Racism organization that contacted him, and they wanted this group from New York City to play at the University of Houston. And he was able to secure it, and then it fell through, and at the last minute he contacted the island and moved it there. And to me, that was on April Fool's Day, 1979, and that was kind of like to me, that was probably the first show I think that every band you could think of that was out there in the scene played. There was AK-47, there was Vast Majority, Plastic Idols, Really Red, Legionnaire's Disease. And I showed up, I actually got called at the last minute, so I showed up, and there was going to be Christian Oppression, and I changed my name to the Heights. And right then, they actually went up on the marquee and took my name down as Christian Oppression and changed it to the Heights.
Okay. And Hates have been playing since 1979 to present day.
Exactly. We just had a CD, our 20th CD release in November at a record store, and I've got a autobiography out called Just a Houston Punk.
So tell me a little bit more about your, first let's shift gears a little bit. How are we doing right here?
That's fine.
Good. Right now we're, based on our recollections, that we're standing at the back of the island.
We've probably been standing outside the building.
Yeah.
So if you went in this direction, there'd be the backstage area.
Yep.
Then there'd be the stage, and then it'd just go right up to the front.
Yeah.
And Ted Barwell was running the sound. And one thing I recounted in my book, what I thought was kind of funny, was there was a guy named Walter Wolf.
Yeah.
And I guess he wanted to be like the very obnoxious kind of person. And there was this old furniture sitting in the back, and he asked if he could do a side project, a band called Dog's Breakfast. So there used to be a two-story building across the street. I don't know what it was exactly, but I think sometimes they'd open it up and there'd be like art exhibits and stuff like that going on there.
Okay.
And so here it was, the Hates were going to play, Dog's Breakfast was going to be the opening act. He goes across the street and he's spray painting Dog's Breakfast on the side of the building and over on the freeway, and the cops show up and they arrest him. So I'm sitting backstage, and Ted comes over to tell me that Walter just got arrested. But the bad thing for Ted is he didn't realize that Walter, just a little earlier, I was sitting there on the couch, and Walter came walking backstage, and he unzipped his pants and he peed on the furniture. And when Ted came running in, he sat down and was like, why is this seat all wet? And I explained to him what Walter had just done.
Oh, dude. Man. Well, and you and I met you not at the club first. I photographed you in the club in the summer of 1980, but I met you during interviews.
I can tell you exactly how I met you. I found out that the newspaper, I guess at the time was the Houston Post.
Yeah, I was at the Houston Post.
I kind of took it for granted. I thought they wouldn't have nothing to do with local bands, but I was told that for free, if you told them when a show was going on, they would list that, and then also that if you sent in your record, that they would review it. So I sent in my record, and I saw nothing pop up, and then I noticed that some of the shows that we were playing at the island weren't being listed. So I thought I'd try to contact somebody on the phone, and they go, oh, well, let me take your name and number, and somebody called me back, and she didn't want to correct that. She wanted to set up an interview, and you came along as the photographer.
Right.
And you ended up, and her, or maybe some other people as well, coming out to the last show that the Hates ever played at this gay disco. It was called the Parade.
Right.
And that little spot is now a fire station, but there's a history there. That used to be the same place where the Texas Opera House was at.
All right.
So there was bands that came to play there like Devo, the Dictators, Talking Heads.
Yeah, Houston was part of the music circuit. You know?
So what we did was that was our last show to be with the lineup of Glenn Servisto on drums and Robert Kaner on bass, and that was the debut of the My Dolls, who were the opening act that night as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize that was their opening, their debut. Oh, interesting. Oh, well, cool. Because I remember photographing that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember photographing you here at the island too, but probably in 81, I think.
Oh, well, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So some later pictures as well. So you played throughout the time of the island's existence until it's closed in '83.
Right.
Do you have any other recollections about performing here at this venue or being part of the scene? Because I think you started wearing a mohawk back, I think, in 1980 or if not earlier.
Yeah, well, I guess what I thought was kind of interesting was the second lineup was Lawrence Baker
Right.
on drums and Paul Minot, who was a medical student up in San Antonio, on bass. And I've actually seen photographs that you saw the island, and you can see Lawrence Baker in many of those photographs. He's got a black biker jacket on and a black flag t-shirt. And what I thought was kind of interesting was we would always just book a show, and then there was just a slew of local bands that would say like, hey, I want to be on this bill. And there's Mike May of Vex, he said he thought it was really nice that we already had 2 bands on the bill, and he walked up to me and he said that, look, I got a band. He goes, we're doing sound check. He goes, can I be on the bill? I go, yeah. He said he's just kind of shocked that I just didn't have no, I wasn't too scrutinizing about it or whatever. And then what really got kind of crazy, I think, around the end of the island was I felt like, who are these guys? They just won't stop wanting to open up for us, and it turned out to be DRI.
Ah.
So that's when they started out. And I've also seen a blurt out there. I got contacted by the Judys, and they were getting frustrated because every time they wanted to play, we were always on that bill. So they finally said, look, we really want to play this date. Do you mind canceling it so we can play on the bill? I said, yeah, no problem.
Okay. All right, cool. So you're considered by many people as one of the first people to not only play the music but live the lifestyle of a punk rocker. And it sounds like you were very generous with your time and support. What else can you say about your drive to play this music and wear your hair and just be who you are?
I mean, I just pinch myself. I feel so fortunate just to, I mean, to me, I feel like I was just a music fan. And what was kind of strange for me was I didn't really know at first if I could be a musician. I was just interested in learning as much as I could about music. And what was kind of different for me was I felt like there was no local music to go listen to. So everything I got educated about was I tried to find every record store I could in town that had an import section. So I ended up buying, there was basically like Warehouse Records, which actually was Evolution Records and tapes before then on Westheimer. And actually the first location was by Surf House over in Northwest Houston. So I used to go there. But back then, their import section was like prog rock stuff. And there'd be like even Pink Floyd, but there was even more weirder stuff. Just there'd be bands like Genesis and Hatfield and North. And then like Robert, who was the first bass player in the Hates, he really enjoyed this band called Henry Cow. But what happened was after a while, I started noticing these 45s coming in. And I didn't realize how rare they were, but a lot of these I found out later, there was only 500 or 1,000 copies made. And I'd go out to Sound Warehouse out on Voss and Westheimer, and I'd just buy up all these records, just not even thinking nothing about them. I found out that some of them were pub rock bands, but some of them were punk rock bands. And what I thought was great was everybody knew who the Sex Pistols and the Ramones were, but I thought these were really gems. These were bands like Johnny and Self Abusers. They were from Scotland. I found out that they saw Generation X come to the UK and do a UK tour, and they said, hey, we're going to put a punk band together. And they played, and they only did a couple shows, and then they were forgotten about. I had this other record. It was another Scottish band. It was called PVC2. It turned out it was Midge Ure. It was really interesting how a lot of these bands actually became new wave musicians. Like the Killjoys became Dexy's Midnight Runners, and Johnny and Self Abusers became Simple Minds. Midge Ure went on to be in Ultravox. Steve Strange, a lot of these people you find that they had punk rock bands, but you probably didn't hear too much about that. Steve Strange went on to open up the Bat Club, and he actually did a video with David Bowie, Ashes to Ashes.
So as a fan, what are your favorite, how often would you come to the island just to listen and hear other bands play and listen to music? Did you get to come out?
Oh yeah, I would go on the weekends because that's what I thought was really exciting. You know, there was, I think Phil kind of got tired of doing the local bands, and then he got really hot on having a lot of Austin bands. And then later on, I think when he just started getting approached by Tom Bunch and Richard Tom Kalla, he started getting national touring acts. You know, you'd see, you'd see some bands that were just starting out. I came in here and REM only had 3 people in the audience.
All right. And then you come in here and Dead Kennedys to be sold out.
By then, I think it was full blown. I feel like there was a second wave. All the kids in the suburbs knew about the island, so they were coming down here and seeing stuff like that.
Don, you got a prompt or some question that we can cover for you?
I can't think of anything at the moment.
Yeah. So we got a little sense of the building. You gave us a good little description of how it fell together. You got a sense of some of the bands and some of the crowds here. I hadn't really. I wanted to find out how you feel about yeah, you're just a fan yourself and just kind of joyous about that. Is there anything you also want to add about your role within the starting out here on the island and playing punk rock music?
It was just, I was still just kind of pinching myself because I just felt that I was learning as I went along. But I guess one thing that changed was it just really made me think that I got to write some songs. You got to, I love the fashion of it, and I just thought it was great that I could just do this. You know, I thought was really interesting is there's kind of a stylized look now to punk rock, but really back then there might be some people from Rice University. There was really a lot of people that were kind of, might say they were kind of like hippies. There was really a lot of psychedelic. I think a lot of the early bands really, for lack of not knowing how to play their instruments, had to rely more on just getting up there and just making a bunch of feedback and just letting that go on. And then the songwriting came along later. So maybe psychedelic may not be the exact description for it, but there really was a lot of people that were into art and stuff like that. You'd find a lot of people, they liked Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa, and so I guess it was a big melting pot of the counterculture. And I think all those people contributed to making I feel like this is where it all came together. At the same time, nowhere else, nothing else. The punk bands didn't get to play anywhere else, really. One time, Ronnie organized a concert of all the punk bands playing way out on the Southwest Freeway at a place called Whiskey River. But that was a fluke, I feel. And then we also went up to Dallas, and there was this club called DJs, and she took a racetrack and put on a 2-day, all-day festival out there.
So speaking of psychedelic, did you ever hear Rocky Erickson perform at the island?
We did shows with him. He'd come down. I was told that he first was using the Nerve Breakers from Dallas as his backup band, but by the time he started coming to the island, he had an Austin band called the Natives. So they'd come out, they'd play, and then they'd be his backup band.
Okay. How was it performing with Rocky?
I tried not to bug him too much because I'd met him. I used to go up to record conventions up at the Palmer Auditorium, and he's just not all there.
Yeah.
Nice, but I mean, you just you don't want to tax his thought process. I mean, he'd get on stage and play, but to talk to him as a person, it was like talking to a wall.
Yeah. So, what kind of influence do you think he had? Any direct influence on the punk movement in the state? He was described as a godfather of punk. Is that how he?
Yeah, you know.
I said grandfather in the interview. He goes, no. I think they call me a godfather.
Well, that's great because I think what's kind of bad is a lot of people are now posting as being from Austin more than from Houston, and I would try to find anything I could, and I had people tell me about that. It might be Half Price Books now, but I think it was a Chinese food restaurant at the time, right at the corner of Times Boulevard and Kirby.
Uh-huh.
That was a club back then, and the Moving Sidewalks played there. Frank Zappa played there. I heard anybody you could think of, and Rocky Erickson, the 13th Floor Elevator, played there a lot. So I've had, just trying to pick people for stories. I've had people tell me stories about the history of Houston in the past. Recently, I was very fortunate to meet David Addix. He's a local artist here in town.
Yeah.
People know him from being from Huntsville, and he's made the statue of Sam Houston, and he's also made some big statues here in Houston. And I picked his brain, found out he started up Love Street Light Circus.
Okay.
And I've bumped into people over the past, I've actually just last week bumped into people when, back in the 60s, my mother saw I was interested in music, so I used to go down to this place called Upstairs in the Square, and there was a band there called Southwest Freeway, and there's actually musicians from that band who were just playing just the other day. So I'll pick anybody's brain for stories and stuff like that. There was a place called the Supermarket, and it had go-go dancers in 2 cages, and it had a live drummer.
Oh.
That was on Old Market Square. It's where Warren's is at now.
Uh-huh.
Because Warren's actually used to be across the square, but the place, I think, burnt down.
So, speaking of some of the memorable venues in the city, anything memorable you describe punkers torching the previous decor here at the island? Anything else in kind of a recollection?
I'm sure people are going to tell you stories about, there used to be that acoustic tiling above the ceiling. There was acoustic tiling above the stage area. And Jerry, the story is, you probably need to get the quote from him on that, but I was under the impression that Jerry, he quickly went climbing up in the rafters out there, and he tore out all that stuff and got banned. I think what's funny is I need to find out why I've got this flyer where it's a show with really red, and it says they were banned, but they're getting to come back to play on this show. So I think that goes to show you how Phil was just always looking for something, or just offended by the liveliness, I guess you could say, of the bands.
Okay, well, that's a beautiful way of describing it. The liveliness of the bands. That's I'm liking that one. That's good. Cool. Anything else we need to hit on?
I think we got a lot of good stuff here.
Okay. I think we got a lot of work to do,
Fantastic.
too. Do you want to go ahead and pop off the sticks and just kind of do a little walk around? You got a shotgun on?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Hey, could I ask you a favor before you do that?
Sure.
Can I take my camera and you shoot a shot of him filming me or something
Okay,
like
sure.
that? Oh, sorry.
That's good. That's good. No worries at all.